Hey everybody, it's Rory from ANSgear. We're upstairs with a MXR, plus we've got the brand new mech frame set up for it. So we're going to do the install, and we're going to do 3 different versions of the install. We're going to do the mech install into the original frame so you can have a mechanical double trigger. Then we'll switch the frames to do mechanical single, and then we'll do single trigger but with the electronics installed. So we're going to try to do those all in a row. So if you are looking for just one section of it, you can skip around obviously in there and find the part that you're looking for. But we're going to kind of just start from the beginning with what we've already got on the gun. So let's look at our box, what we've got inside here. Nice case. The case does double to put the standard frame in it when you're using the single trigger. So we have our single trigger set up inside. We can go ahead and pop this thing out. Our solenoid is in here, ready to go. We have our dummy board, which we will use to replace our upper board, and then just some little bits and bobs as far as O-rings and seals go. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the grips from the mech frame, just so we can have everything out. So let's get those off. So mech grips off, we'll just set those over here. Here's our mech frame. We're going to be removing the solenoid assembly out and installing it over here into this one. So let's get our barrel off. And really we're just going to put that out of the way because we're not going to need that really, because we're not going to be shooting the marker. And then let's get disassembly done. So let's get our front grip off, put that over here, get our rear grip off. So we're going to have that off most of the time. Rear grip off. And let's get our bolt out. Set that up there. And now we're down to kind of the bare bones setup right here. Let's get the frame off. And for the first setup right here, we're not going to need to switch over the ASA because we're keeping this frame and just installing the 3-way valve or the mechanical valve into it. So we're going to go from there. Another thing, because we are going to remove the upper board and replace it with the dummy board, we don't need the batteries in. So we're going to pull the batteries out and move those to the side. The only time we're going to need the batteries in is when we're doing single trigger electric, but we're not going to need it for double trigger mech or single trigger mech, so we can just pull them out. Let's get our frame off. Remove our front frame screw and our rear frame screw. There we go. And then our frame should just split apart. Let's do our upper first. We can just get rid of or get that done and out of the way. So let's get into our box. I'm going to kind of move this stuff over a little bit so that I can pull this in and you can see. We're going to take the dummy board, which is going to replace our upper board right here. So once we've got the frame off, there's a little clip that we can just slide back, and it slides out, and you can set it to the side. Then we can lift this up. If we left the batteries in up at the front, you can't pull this board out because I'll show you, the board has the connections for the battery on it. So if the batteries are still there and they're under pressure pushing down on these posts or these springs, you can't get this out. So the batteries need to be out. When we pull this board out, there's our little rubber eye towers that are inside here. This is what the eye sensors are looking up into and receiving through. They sometimes will pop out, but it's very obvious which direction they sit in. So as you take this board out, watch for these towers to come out with it and then just push them back into where they need to go. Once we have that, we can set that down, take our dummy board, set it in, and then take our clip and slide it back into position. That locks the board or the dummy board in place. We're done with that. We can take our board and slide it into the slot where the dummy one was, and it keeps it nice and secure inside there. I'm going to just lay it on top because eventually we're going to be using that again down the road. All right, so upper section is finished. We're good with that. Now we've got our lower section, which we need to remove the original solenoid, board, and like jumper board, so that this board, this little connector right here, allows the lower board down here to communicate with the upper board. So we want to remove all those things. So we are going to take the pin out. So this pin, am I going the right way? Yeah, I am. This pin holds the original solenoid in place. And we can now slide the solenoid up. The solenoid is still plugged in. It's plugged in on this side over here. So we want to make sure that that is unplugged. We just unplug it from right there. And now we can pull this whole housing up and out. And here's our solenoid housing or assembly. There's a little gasket that sits right in here. We want to make sure that that is in there, that it didn't come out with the solenoid. It fits into that little slot right there, that little recess. We want to make sure that when we pull that solenoid out, that that stays down inside there. All right, now that we've got that out, we need a screwdriver. This jumper board right here is held in with a little Phillips screw. Take that out. Set that to the side. That frees up our jumper board. Then we can do this screw here and this screw here. Take those two out. And now our board can come out. So our board, main board here, is connected to the display board through a bent set of prongs. And we want to push the board out from, if you're looking at the trigger facing away from you, from right to left. So we want to push this way on the board and disconnect it without putting a lot of force, lateral force or sideways force or bending force on where the connection is down here. So if you need, you can take your Allen key, push right next to it, and pop that board out. And you can see this is where it plugs in right down here. And with that out, then we can slide our electronics board out the other direction. And it comes out over here. And these would plug in like this when they're inside. So we'll just set those off to the side over there. Now from our original mech frame, we can remove the pin that holds that solenoid in place. And then we can just slide the assembly up and out. And there is another gasket inside this one. Just make sure that it doesn't stick in this one, so that when you try to put it into the other one, you've got two gaskets sitting on top of each other. That would make it so that it won't seal. And then we just drop it in like that, line up our hole, and push our retaining pin through, and it locks it in place. Now we've got a double trigger for our mech setup. We can take this, line up our frame holes. Put that on there. And put that on there. And there we have it. Double trigger mech setup. Super cool. All right. Now we can take that apart. We can move on to the next one. So the next one will be just putting the single trigger mech in. All right, so we're going to go back kind of a couple steps to where we're going to pretend like we had just pulled this frame off. The electronics and everything were still in it. The solenoid was still in it. And we just moved it off to the side and set it down over here. This would, in theory, still be inside of this frame because we never removed it for the original one we did. All right, so we've got this going on here. This is our safety assembly. You can see how it slides back and forth through the bottom right here. When it slides back into safety, it goes underneath the trigger plate and it does not let the trigger move all the way down. When it is in the forward position, it allows the trigger to come all the way down and activate. So that's how your safety works. Once we have all of this stuff off, we're in the same position. Original board is removed, batteries are out, same spot. All we need to do is take this, put this on here, and we're almost done. So mech frame on. Let's see, just want to make sure I'm lining this up. Like that. Flip that over. That's on there. Next step, which is different from the original ones that we did, or the original setup we did, is we need to remove our regulator ASA and throw it onto the other marker. So we're going to do this screw at the bottom. We're going to do this screw at the bottom. Slide, kind of just give it some wiggles and pull down at the same time. Slide the whole assembly out and put this in. If you pull this off and you don't see any grease on the O-ring on the inside, or you don't see any grease on the little post that's sticking down from your mech frame, put a little grease on there. And then we can just slide this up and in. And do that. And do that. Make sure that this is tight. And we are ready to go. We would take our bolt, put that back in, take our grips, put them on, but we want to use the grips. Well, not those ones. These ones right here. I hadn't picked them up the first time. So these grips, so that we're ready to go. Put them on. I guess you could use the other ones too. It really doesn't matter, because that doesn't do anything. This is just a little rubber directional joystick. So I guess you definitely want to use this one, because this one has the metal joystick in there. We don't want to stack that one on top of that one. So that one's going to go in there. This little rubber part's going to poke out through that hole, and then you are ready to go. All right, so there's our mech setup for single trigger. And then for some reason, you might want a mech setup with electronics in it. Now, the only thing that's going to do for you is maybe if you're looking for a game timer, something like that, you would use that setup. We're going to leave the upper body the same, because when we put the electronics in, the eyes aren't going to, there's no point in having an eye system in there, because you can't, the gun can't not let you shoot when you're shooting mechanical, even if it detects or doesn't detect a ball. So that the eye system doesn't matter inside there. So the upper board section, we're not going to put that back in. Doesn't matter. Plus the solenoid, you know, it's just not going to work. We don't need that in there. We're just going to put in the lower board and the screen for the back. So we've got a little connector on here for our jumper to go up. We're going to pull that out. We really don't need that to be in there because we don't need to communicate with the upper board. Since we're not activating a solenoid, we're not doing anything. We're not using eyes. So we can just take that little piece off and set it to the side. All right. Now, let's do a little swapperoo. Let's go, we're going to pull this board off. Where's my screw? Make sure that this is laying the same way. I don't know if you actually necessarily need to take this piece off. I'm not going to do it. You could move this piece over. I see that they've put the plate on there. If you needed to know your regulator pressure coming through, how these guns, if you switch them over, you can see what the pressure running through the gun is. Problem is if I pull this screw out right here, that's underneath here, I'm going to rip up this this tab that goes over there, and it says it'll void your warranty if you take that off of there. If you really needed to do it, you really wanted to know, you could switch those two pieces over there. If that's important to you, that's up to you. For this gun, seeing though this is a gun that is on our wall downstairs in the retail, I'm not going to do that to this one. I was hoping I could just pull that one off and then pull the board out, but it does require me to pull that other screw out. So I'm not going to do that. But you could. You could pop this plate off, switch those two over there if you really wanted to know that pressure reading that is underneath there. It is not necessary to do, but you could do it. Don't need to, but you could. Okay, now that we have done our mech frame install, we did our double trigger install mech frame. Now we're kind of going to go full circle and go all the way back and put all of our electronics back in, but still have the single trigger, which is what, some people want, a single trigger electric gun. So first thing we're going to do is take our frame off, because we're going to need to get back underneath there. So frame. Off. Bring that down. We're going to remove our dummy board because we're going back in with this one. So dummy board can fit back in there. We can drop that in, lock this down, take our battery housing out, and then put our batteries back in. All right, so now we've got our electric upper board, batteries installed. We're going to take our mech solenoid out. Make sure that our lower gasket stays down and doesn't come out. So we can just set that, we'll set that over here off to the side. And then we're going to be able to put all our bits and bobs back in. So let's take this and put this back on. I was fiddling around with this. That can go on there. Now we can put our electronics in here. We've got two screws to reinstall the electronics in, or the board in. So the main bottom board here gets the two screws we set off to the side. And remember, we are working with the mech frame here. We didn't switch back to the two-finger train. Two-finger train? Two-finger frame. And then our jumper board, we're going to reconnect with the little small screw that has the O-ring on it. Don't need to over tighten that or anything. We just want to be able to, we want that O-ring that's on that screw to be able to just hold it in place. So here we are. Then we can take our display board and we're going to slide that in. We're going to take out the rubber like spacer board or placeholder board. And then we're going to slide this in. So we've got some very delicate, very small prongs that are along this board here. And they need to line up with that socket that's down in there. Now by dropping this into the right spot, usually they'll line up. But if we turn it over and look, and then we look at an angle, we make sure all of those holes line up with the sockets. That way when we push it down in, everything goes into its home and it doesn't bend any of the prongs. That's really what we want to make sure doesn't happen, because we don't want any of those prongs to bend or not be in their housings. Everything looks good. I can go ahead and push that down in there. Don't, again, like I said, I don't want to force it until I know I'm lined up. All right, there we go. Board is all the way in, it's smooth along the side, it's sitting flush down inside there, and all of my pins are in their appropriate sockets right there. That's a section or an action or a step that you don't want to rush. You don't want to bend those prongs, you don't want to smash anything, so take your time, make sure it lines up, wiggle it around, make sure everything's in the right spot. Just don't force anything when you're working with that section. All right, now we can take our solenoid. We can drop our solenoid back in. Go right down in there. Our solenoid is going to plug in on the opposite side, so we're going to kind of make sure our cabling is going in the right way. We can get that down and out of the way. So now we've got our solenoid hole, retainer pin hole lined up. Put our pin back through, so it's going to hold our solenoid in place. If we've been moving this thing around a lot and we've got this upper gasket that's become dry or doesn't have any grease on it, just put a nice thin little layer of grease on there. We can plug in our solenoid. I have to set this one down so that I can bend it. That, and then we are ready to go. I'm going to just clean up my wiring a little bit, make sure nothing's getting pinched, nothing's in the way of anything. And then we can take this, make sure that our jumper pins, which are along the top that we put in, go into the jumper slot over here. Screws, put them in. I don't tighten down my screws until I've got them all in. That way I'm not forcing screws to go well they don't want to. All right, then we can take that, put that in here, and then we can put our grips back on, but let me power this on. Maybe. My battery's dead. Did I put them in wrong? Oh, I did. Put them both the same direction. Silly, silly Rory. There we go. So now we've got single trigger electric. We've got our eyes functioning properly, as they should. And we've got the setup where if we really wanted to have some fun, but just with that single trigger, we're ready to go. Our solenoid retainer popped out. That's what's held in by our grips. So when our grip is on there, that pin can't slide out of there. Still have adjustments with that trigger up at the top. So if you need to check pre or post travel, you can still do that. But that's it. So 3 install options with the Mech Frame kit. You've got double trigger mech, single trigger mech, or single trigger electric, all in one setup right there. Hope that helped you guys do some installing. It's a super sick setup. You've seen us shoot it outside. Get on the website, check it out. Mech Frame for the MXR with multiple installation options at ANSgear.com.